There is no place like home, home sweet home, be home and dry, as safe as houses. English language is full of idioms like this. Playing at home in football terms historically also means a lot. It implies a sizable initial advantage. For instance, in the 1980s and the 1990s, head coaches used to make special emphasis on the venue of second leg, evaluating the draw in the European Cups, and if it has been scheduled at home, it was usually perceived almost like a victory, sometimes irrespective of the opponent's caliber. If we will plunge into reality of those distant days, it won't take a lot of efforts and logic to realize why it was this way. In the situation when both teams met each other effectively blindfolded in the 1980s, club football was a rare guest on TV, even in the countries like Italy and England. The domestic factor proved to be decisive more often than not. As for the return match, with advantage squared, because the hosts already knew what a balance of power is and what exact result they need in order to qualify, and had an opportunity to adjust their tactics and intensity accordingly. Under these circumstances, playing in front of own spectators was a huge bonus, and knowing that the second game at home awaits them, even top clubs weren't shy to play first match on the road in extremely negative manner, very much like Jose Mourinho's AS Roma are doing it nowadays. For example, Real Madrid in the mid-1980s, en route to two consecutive UEFA Cup triumphs, lost almost all away games, unfailingly taking revenge at the Santiago Bernabeu a couple of weeks later. Being aware of the fact how different were approach and psychology of the same team at home and on the opponent's turf in that era, I was personally moderately surprised when saw the exact numbers which tell that a side that played second leg in front of its own supporters in the last 15 years of existing three European Cups in a classic format has been able to go to the next round just in about 54% cases. On top of that, in the senior tournament, this figure was even slightly less than 50%, which has a clear explanation though. In the era of the good old Champions Cup, the draw was blind, whilst all participants started from the first round, and as a consequence, mighty teams often met pushovers. We could recall the all-conquering AC Milan facing the modest HJK in 1989 and the unpretentious Olimpia Ljubljana in 1992, and in that cases order of matches had basically no importance at all. To be truthful, the Italian club could have faced those opponents playing away from home even twice, and an outcome would be more or less the same. Cases of this kind obviously affected the whole picture and to a certain extent distorted it. As for the other two competitions, the edge in the form of second leg at home there was much more steady and stable. The trend started to slowly and gently reverse in the late 1980s, when AC Milan, under the guidance of Arrigo Sacchi, paved the way to the rest, playing in away games in a much more incisive and positive manner, and trying to dominate even being in front of the hostile public. This tendency gained strength near to the mid-1990s, when top clubs were gathered an additional force and increasingly separated themselves from the others. Amid this, the favorites often simply interpreted the second leg as a decisive match, elevating their efforts and performance regardless of venue. Vivid illustration of it is the first round of UEFA Cup 1995-1996, when the powerful Bayern heavily underestimated the underdog Lokomotiv Moscow and lost game in Munich, but 2 weeks later avenged this defeat in style by thumping the opponent 5-0 on his turf. Few months later, Ajax almost repeated the streak in the Champions League semi-final, facing the cheeky Panathinaikos. In the late 1990s, with the rapid extension of the Champions League, the importance of playing a return match at home diminished even further. In the situation when adversaries already had much more information about each other, by that time all the games were constantly broadcasted. It's been tougher and tougher to catch somebody napping, especially in the knockout stage, which started from the quarterfinal back then. On the other hand, the rates in the form of money, prestige and popularity climbed enormously, and desire to avoid an early and excessive risk with increasing frequency overshadowed aspiration to get a nice cushion before the second leg outside of home. Honestly, the latter has been way too hard to achieve, given how equal and meticulously prepared teams usually were. Every goal, especially the away one, was at a premium, and the low-scoring affair in the first contest was more than a norm. 20 plus years have passed since, and what have we got? Basically, an evolution of this trend. The distance between home and away games vanished even more, to such a degree that head coaches used to compare the second leg with the second half of the same match. Every high-level tie for a long time is no other than a constant and sophisticated game of adjustments, and to win it in general is much more profitable than to have an elusive advantage in the shape of playing in front of your own supporters in a return game. It doesn't mean that native soil itself isn't an edge anymore. It's not so indeed, but in order to manage this initial benefit, one must have to put more efforts than ever and do a bunch of things perfectly. If we take the quarter-final stage of the last 3 Champions League editions, only in 4 cases out of overall 11, the home teams have been able to win on aggregate. I deliberately put the Porto vs Chelsea 2021 tie out of equation, bearing in mind that both games went on the neutral territory due to the pandemic. On top of that, in each instance, those outfits, PSG in 2021, Real Madrid and Liverpool a year later, and Inter just recently, to be exact, did the most damage on the road in the first leg. Meanwhile, the picture takes on a completely different look if we evaluate the things in a more concrete, personified way. As you may see, the matter of converting the home advantage in the second leg into a berth to the next round very much depends on the particular club and distinctive manner of play. 8 teams that historically were part of the Champions League knockout stage more often than the rest are divided into 3 categories. The first of them, which also includes Chelsea, is headed by Real Madrid and Barcelona and represents those who gained the most from the home edge in the decisive match, been truly staggering, especially in the case of the Catalans. These figures, nevertheless, have a clear explanation. As great as they are, both Spanish grandes, with their innate finesse and elegant passing style, are traditionally home-dependent teams that on the road, in the adverse conditions, often were the victims of the more than evident lack of physicality and stamina. For the sake of justice, it needs to point out that during Zinedine Zidane's era, Real Madrid, with its ever-witty, dangerous and free-flowing, sophisticated offense, became probably the best road team in the history of the competition, winning in 2018 all 3 away matches in the playoff. The current Los Blancos side is also pretty solid, being away from home, exemplifying poise, experience, and perseverance. Barcelona, in its turn, won only 4 playoff ties in total, playing the second leg outside the beloved Camp Nou. It's significant that all the cases accounted for the years of Champions League triumphs 2009, 2011 and 2015. So when the Blaugrana will be able to finish the job on the road in the knockout stage next time, it would be a really good omen for the Catalan fans. In contradistinction to Zidane's Real, Barca, even in the glorious days of Guardiola, used to perform away from home in a different, much more subdued and circumspect mode, with an emphasis on prolonged but mainly sterile possession. Back at those days, Guardiola used to make the midfield more robust by inserting into the starting lineup the extremely reliable Seydou Keita and moving Andres Iniesta forward in the attacking trio. The second group of teams comprised those whose results stayed basically the same, regardless of the second leg's venue. It's curious that Manchester United have a relatively poor record playing the decisive match of a tie at Old Trafford, despite being in general a pretty strong home team during the memorable tenure of Sir Alex Ferguson. It's doubly interesting that the main reason of these numbers is the Scotsman's excessive caution. Being aware of the fact that the return game will be at Old Trafford, Ferguson often proved to be too prudent and calculative. Hence, he was inadvertently taking his team from its natural football, and later regularly has been unable to reverse the result in front of home spectators, when the pressure coming from a tight score started to creep in. As for Juventus, it represents the third category on its own. The Turin-based club is absolutely unique, being able to qualify in 10 out of 12 cases, playing a crucial return match of the Champions League playoff away from home. Furthermore, at one point, the old lady was an amazing 8-0 in these kinds of games, successfully reaching the final in 2015, starting each duel at home. Such an uncanny knack to perform in the format, which proved to be uncomfortable for many others, is the combination of several factors. Firstly, Juventus are traditionally really good in defending its advantage, even if it is a slim one, and obviously it's easier to get a cushion at home and then try to retain an edge being on the road. Secondly, all the club's prolific Champions League campaigns were when Marcello Lippi and Massimiliano Allegri have been in charge, to coaches that are famous for their ability to adjust and adapt to concrete scoreline and situations. The only difference is that Lippi used to mix up various football styles, whereas Allegri, who always worked in a classic Italian manner, is a master of small, barely visible tactical tweaks and corrections. Using them along with his motivational skills, the ingenious Massimiliano has been able to turn things around, albeit temporarily, even against Bayern in 2016 and Real Madrid 2 years later, the only two ties Juve eventually lost in this format, playing the second leg away from Turin. This shows how vital is the game of adjustments in the modern football, and being an outlier among the other top clubs, the Italian giant very much underlines the above described trend.